Thank you all so much for joining us on this week's edition of ETV News. I'm Tyler Madden. Since Eastern made the announcement a few weeks ago that the remainder of the spring semester would be completed in an online format, students have been traveling back to campus, packing up their belongings from their dorms, and heading back home. But what was the process of returning home like for students that were studying abroad, especially students that were studying in countries that were near the ones first impacted by the coronavirus? One of those students is Eastern junior Sammy Honeywell, who also happens to be a member of ETV News, who I recently sat down with. Sammy, thanks for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
So could you talk about where you were specifically in Europe when the virus hit that part of the world?
Yeah, so I was studying in Barcelona, Spain, and I vividly remember it hitting Italy pretty bad, and I did not think it would hit all of Europe, but it did.
When did the coronavirus first start being thought of as a major problem? We remember it started to be brought up in the United States a few weeks ago, but when over there was it starting to become a concern for people?
So in around the beginning of March, that's when it really started to become a problem. Honestly, we were all just kind of cracking jokes before then, and we didn't think it would leave China. And then when it hit Italy and all of the kids from Italy were getting sent home, that's when it started to become a fear that we were also going to be sent home.
What was the overall reaction from people in Spain? What were they thinking about it?
So I remember when it was getting extremely, when people were getting extremely scared about it, like our parents were starting to get worried, universities were starting to send kids home. Spain was really not doing anything about it. I would go to my normal classes. I was still traveling. I went to Paris the weekend before I went home, and people were not taking it seriously like they should have. All of the restaurants were still open. They were not taking any precautions like they should have. And I think that's why Spain blew up. They're now the second in the world with the most cases. So I think that they didn't really take it seriously, and that's why they're now suffering the consequences.
You mentioned you did traveling just days before you decided to come back to the United States. Was there a concern traveling from country to country from people there?
No, not really. It wasn't until Trump's announcement that everyone started to actually get worried. But I was traveling. I traveled to Paris literally days before I went home. And it wasn't a big deal. France was just under Spain of the corona cases. And no one was really worried at all.
Can you talk to me about the decisions that were made? You said your parents were getting concerned about everything going on over there. The decision and how that decision was made to decide to come back, was it before President Trump announced those travel restrictions?
So in my classes at Barcelona, there was one class. It was my Tuesday night class, and a bunch of students, half of the class, were getting emails during the class that they had to come home from their home universities. And that was when I started to get nervous. So I was talking to my mom, and I was like, they're not sending us home yet. They're not canceling the program, but all of these kids are getting sent home from their home universities. So I was emailing Dr. P at Eastern, who's the study abroad advisor. I was talking to her. She was thinking it might be a good idea I come home. So they sent us a letter saying that we should come home. They gave us a week's notice, but I booked my flight for the next day. And that night, Trump announced that he was having the travel restriction ban. So literally flights skyrocketed the prices. So I got so lucky that I booked it for the next day, because the day after, that's when the travel ban was.
Talking about now, so you're finally home. What precautions were you taking, and did you have to take when you finally did get home?
So I did go under quarantine. My mom is a nurse, so she works in a hospital. My dad has had a few health issues, so they were definitely really worried about me being home, just because they were worried. We didn't know at the time that symptoms didn't have to be shown and you could be a carrier, but my mom just assumed that it could be a possibility. So they sent me right up to my cabin to quarantine. I was not home for 2 weeks. They left my car at the airport and off I went. They gave me a bunch of groceries, and I stayed in isolation for 2 weeks.
And you were talking about people being asymptomatic. We're going to talk to Dr. Breton about that, Eastern's Director of Health Services, about that concern of people that may have the coronavirus but aren't showing those symptoms. So now that you're home and now that you finished up that quarantine, How are you going to finish up your classes for the rest of the semester now that you're home?
So it was definitely, they were kind of contemplating doing the Zoom, like the live classes, but they soon realized that all of the students in our classes were from all over the world, not just the US. We have West Coast, East Coast of the United States, but also I had kids in my classes from Iran, from Sweden, Norway. So they couldn't do like a live class setting. So instead, we are actually doing our classes through email. So they will send us PowerPoints, videos. Some of them are just like notebook pages to look at. And then we have to send our homework back to them. I don't know how we're going to do exams or any of that. A few of my professors are switching to like exam projects instead. But otherwise, it's definitely an interesting process.
Before we let you go, Sammy, I've got to ask, 14 days by yourself, what did you do to occupy all that time?
A lot of Netflix. And it also, I didn't have Wi-Fi up there, so I had to use all my data. But I went on a lot of walks, cleaned a lot, baked a lot, ate a lot, and watched a lot of movies.
I've got to ask, did you watch Tiger King? I know everybody's been watching that. Have you watched Tiger King?
No, I haven't watched it yet. I really have no interest in watching that. I will watch everything else on Netflix before I have to watch that show.
Well, Sammy, we're happy that you made it back safe and that you're doing well. So, Sammy Honeywell, thank you again for joining us today.
Thank you.
To get a medical perspective on all of this, I recently sat down with Eastern's Director of Health Services, Dr. Joseph Brennan. Take a look. Joining me here now via Microsoft Teams is Dr. Joseph Brennan, the Director of Health Services at Eastern. Dr. Brennan, thank you for joining me.
Thank you.
So we talked a few weeks ago on campus in our studio before Eastern decided to shut down. What do you feel has been the biggest development since we last spoke a few weeks ago?
I think really almost the entire state shutting down. When we were talking last time, this was very preliminary and slowly places were closing, but now everyone really fell into order, and that's probably the biggest, not that it wasn't expected, but it's amazing to see.
When you think of health services on campus, you think of serving those health needs of the students. So what's the role now of health services now that the campus is shut down and no students are there?
Right. I mean, we are a very hands-on group, obviously, when we're seeing patients. Right now, we are still available. I get emails from students, and my staff has gotten emails and phone calls as well. So we are still very available for the students. They just have to get in touch with us through the phone or internet.
So, of course, many different models are coming out about how long is the coronavirus's impact of it going to last. Models coming out the other day saying the peak might not be in Connecticut, might not hit Connecticut till the end of this month, beginning of May. So, do we have really any idea on how long this is going to be impacting the people here in the state of Connecticut?
Yeah, I obviously haven't seen where they got their data from. I'm fairly confident that they're probably on track, like Department of Public Health, and when they're calculating out when the peak is going to be. But after that, I really think it's guesswork. And usually with these kind of huge catastrophes, we'll find out next year what the real data showed. The information we're getting is so conflicting. I'm not part of any of the research, so I don't really trust it. And it really is guesswork at this point. But May seems like a logical time that it should die down.
So a major concern now being brought up for the last few days is people being carriers of the virus but not showing any symptoms, being asymptomatic. Can you talk about what that means and that new concern for people?
Yeah, so actually there was preliminary data even from Italy and from China that there were asymptomatic carriers. We can only do so much, right? And the most important thing we can do is just take care of ourselves. So if you have to go out, like I'm sure you have, to get gas or something, you just consider that everybody is positive, and I'm washing my hands after I put gas in the car. It's crazy. Like any kind of public contact, and I consider that I was exposed.
So we're in the middle of this pandemic right now, but there's even talk while we're in the middle of this one of a second wave of this virus hitting later on down the road. What have you heard about that being a possibility?
Yes, again, conflicting data, but logically it would make sense that it would come back, right? We are by no means eliminating the virus. Coronavirus causes about 25% of colds and symptoms in people. So this strain of virus has been around a very long time. This particular new one hasn't been, but I don't see any reason why it would not come back, unfortunately.
And so we're talking now that concern of it coming back, but also this idea of being able maybe down the road to bring people back to some sort of normalcy, back to work and things like that. We know we're focusing now, of course, on testing, getting those quick test results back. But has there been talk of how we can ease people back into a normal everyday life of going to work and coming home and different things like that?
Right. I think that, it's a good question. And I actually did a little poll of my friends to say, if there were no new cases in Connecticut today, when would you feel safe traveling? And really, I think most people are, when you think about places like Las Vegas or Florida, people are probably still going to wait 6 months or a year before they venture out to do those fun things. For us, I think once we get back to work, after 2 or 3 weeks, we'll be back into the same, situation. I think we'll all be comfortable. So that's the hope anyway.
Is there any idea of when we can get back to normal, when Eastern's campus might open back up?
I have not, besides being closed for the semester, which, Dr. Nunez talked about, the goal would be obviously summertime and at the latest fall. But so many unknowns at this point. But I can, let's hope for the fall. That's what I'm hoping for, at least.
Well, we see every day information coming out from Washington, D.C., from those daily briefings and from the governors of all the different states across the country. What do you think is the most important thing you want students to know about this virus?
So it really, if we try to look at the big picture, like you said, with all the different news outlets, I think it gets overwhelming. It really is overwhelming. And we have to realize there's only so many things we can control, right? I can't control what's going on in New York or Massachusetts or across the nation. I can pretty much just control what I'm doing on a daily basis. And really that's what it gets down to. And if everybody does that, we'll really be in great shape in the next few weeks. So, just let go of what you can't control.
Well, Dr. Brennan, I appreciate you taking the time to come and talk with me today about this, about the coronavirus.
All right. Well, I appreciate it.
That's all for this week's edition of ETV News, but make sure you tune in next week to hear my conversation with Eastern's Athletics Director, Lori Runksmeyer, where I talk with her about how the coronavirus has impacted sports at Eastern. Thank you all so much for watching. Good night.